everyone, and welcome to Codurance Meetups. So my name is Jack, and I'm head of sales in Codurance Spain. As I'm doing this intro, I'm gonna keep on admitting some people into Zoom, so excuse me if my eyes and mouse flutter. So just for those of you who don't know Codurance, we're a global consulting company born out of the software craftsmanship community, and we enable organizations to drive innovation through agile software practices, hands-on expertise, specialist expertise, expert advice, and knowledge transfer as well. And we're helping more and more organizations than ever before sort of build secure, flexible, and scalable software that matches the the needs of their businesses and the demands of their businesses. So I'll be the host for today, and presenting our talk is Maciej from our Codurance UK office. Maciej is a software craftsperson at Codurance. He comes from a scientific background and with formal qualifications in psychology and computer science. And in this meeting, we're talking about soft skills in software development. So it's a very interesting topic, and it's a very wide-ranging topic. And this is going to be the first in a series of meetups on this particular topic. So the first one is that the Maciej's going to talk through is more on the sort of the theory in general, laying the foundations on sort of soft skills in software development. And then the other two, which with dates that we'll be publishing very soon through our channels such as YouTube and on our website and social media, will be around the exercises in soft skills, and also the metrics around soft skills, and how people can evaluate the progression in this particular area. Just a quick reminder that we have been recording this, and we will continue to record this meetup. It will be, as with all of our, as I'm just admitting a few more people, as with all of our meetups, they are available on our YouTube channel. So if you could mute yourself, that would be just great for Maciej when he starts talking as well. And take a look at the at Codurance, because we were, in terms of the YouTube channel, we were born out of the community, and so we like to listen to the community. If there are any topics that you feel that you'd like to share with us to discuss, then we can always create some topics, some meetups, talks around those particular topics. So feel free to share that with us as well. And lastly, so the Maciej's going to talk for around about 50 minutes or so. So please leave any questions in the chat. We'll do the best we can to answer questions at the end. If there aren't any questions that we can't answer, or if there's no time, then we can always tackle them in the next meetup on this series, which, as I said, the dates will be confirmed really soon. So just keep an eye out for that. Right, over to Maciej. Maciej, over to you.
Excellent. All right, cool. So I think I'm going to start with a typical Zoom cliche. So I'm going to share my screen, which will be, can you see my screen? Which I'm going to presume you can.
Yeah,
all right,
present. No, perfect.
Excellent. Cool. So, well, first of all, good evening, everyone, and thank you all for coming. And it's really awesome actually to see how many people sort of got interested in the subject and how well it sort of resonated throughout the community. To be perfectly honest with you, I never sort of expected for it to sort of gather that much audience. So initially I was hoping like, yeah, maybe 10, 15 people. And when we actually saw that around 100 people who signed up for the meetup, I was like, okay, this is going to go well. And like Jack already has said, as you might be already aware, this is a part one of the series of initially 3 meetups that we're going to do. So today it will be a almost entirely theory, and on the following meetups we will try to do some exercises. So right now we're working on the formats in which we can actually facilitate all the people to be able to participate and actively do some stuff with us. So this is sort of work in progress. We'll do our best to actually deliver it. And also in the meantime, I think we'll be posting some exercises on our blog page. So it will be followed up with a series of articles where you can follow it up and see what is what. So Jack has sort of slightly jumped the gun and introduced me already, so I'm not going to reiterate it. So my name is Maciej, and I'm a software craftsperson here at Codurance. And for, well, 5 years ago, before I sort of transitioned to software development as a professional, I used to work as a healthcare professional in NHS when I sort of worked primarily with patients. So I was doing the consultations with them and actually doing medical procedures. And in parallel with that, over the last 6 years, I've done 2 degrees. So one is with psychology of neuroscience and computer science as well. So both of them were actually done at the Research University at Birkbeck here in London. So just a tiny bit about what we're going to cover today. So first of all, we're going to have a very quick chat about what is software development in general and how it sort of is a socio-technical practice. Then we're going to move on to some soft skills. And so we're going to have a look at the origin of the concept, how it's involved, and what are its pitfalls as well. From there, we're going to move a hypothesis that we sort of have, and based on the evidence that we sort of like presented thus far, we'll hypothesize what are the problems with the soft skills in software development. And from there, we're going to jump straight onto the solutions of the problem that we just sort of outlined. So we are going to, come on, I need to meet people. All right. So we're going to look at the core skills, which are a rebranding and sort of more clearly defined subset of soft skills. Then we're going to have a look at the theory of mind, which basically is our innate ability to read other people's minds. We're going to have a quick chat about the cognitive biases. We're going to introduce a few and outline how useful it actually is to have that knowledge and how we can basically apply it. And at the very end, we're going to look at some references. And for those of you who actually managed to survive through the whole talk, so I'm thinking around 50 minutes, we'll do some Q&A. So basically everything that I present in here is going to be quite heavily based on the academic research. So there'll be a lot of references. So if you're interested in it, I think we might share the slides or maybe not. I'm not entirely sure. So if anything, just grab a few screenshots and I think it should be all right. So as a follow-up, so for the second one, we're going to cover a few other topics that we're just not able to squeeze into this talk. So we're going to speak a bit about self-awareness, introspection, and personality types, and how basically it is useful, or maybe not, when you try to build teams and basically accommodate people, and how to also build sort of realistic plan that you can, through which you can hone and basically train those skills. And also, if we manage to actually find a format in which we can do it, we'll do some exercises that you can then tailor and basically implement on your own organizational level. Okay, so there we go. So from experience, I think most of us, assuming that everyone is from the software development profession, we know how, you know, your typical sort of day at work as a software development looks like. So you usually plop yourself in the computer, you browse some emails, you chat a bit with someone, you might go through Jira Redmine tickets, and generally you'll usually have some sort of morning stand-up with some people, and then you basically sail off and you start coding and you'll be happy for a pretty long time. And that is, of course, assuming that you don't do such a horrible thing as pair programming or other bits and pieces when you actually have to interact with people. Another thing that is sort of part of our job description is at some point someone will actually come in and they will interrupt it. And as a part of this interruption, we usually have to basically either speak with some person and go to a meeting, and it's sort of natural that we have to advise on solution, we have to share our expertise. In some other scenario, we have to negotiate with someone that will need more time on this issue, or we need to convince someone that this is not a good idea, we shouldn't actually be implementing that. And sometimes you have to work on the requirements, so you have to write a user story. The routine basically. And in some other situations, if you're in a situation like I am, you might be forced to actually do a presentation for a group of people, or God forbid, some sort of demo. So in short, the vast majority of our work is not only being in this sort of happy bubble of writing code, but also it's to communicate and coordinate with other people so you can actually align those streams of work. And that is obviously, the sort of like happy path. But we know sort of that our work is not only the happy path. So you have a situation where someone from marketing will pop in, we'll need this issue urgently, or you'll find some unexpected bug just a day before the release. And this will obviously cause a lot of pressure, and it will fundamentally shift how you think and communicate with people. And also it will require you to actually have a very different subset of skills in this situation where you actually have to manage other people and their stress. You have to also maintain the morale of those people. So in short, you all of a sudden have to have like this completely different mode of operation in which you also need to do this fundamental thing, which is to communicate and coordinate with other people to align this work. So from this sort of anecdote, we can actually see that, on a purely sort of like story-like basis, our work is, socio-technical in basically in practice. So how does it actually look in numbers? So, come on, more people to admit. Come on, Jack. So actually in here, it was a research done by University of Zurich in 2017. And what they've done, they basically looked at many different companies, many different people, and they looked at how much time as a developer you spent on different tasks. So going from the 12 sort of clockwise, first of all, you do collaboration with other people. So as mentioned, it's the meetings, it's the talking with other people, 24% of your time, straight there. And then you have emails and other forms of non-verbal communication, 14% of the time. Then there's this miscellaneous, and that's a funny one. And that's something that I'm not really going to discuss because this is everything else that we do. So it could be playing ping pong, literally. And then we go to the core, what we would think is our job, which is development. And it's only 21%. So it's a fifth of the stuff that we actually do at work. And then obviously there is a technical research. So basically, all your stat overflows or your documentations and how to use APIs and code snippets, all of that, it's sort of there. So that was just a single study, right? So obviously there are more studies than this one, and the sort of meta-analysis on it quite clearly outlines that between 6 and 61% of your time, depending on your seniority, on the context, on the type of the project, 6 to 61%, that will be the time that you spend doing the programming. So quantitatively, from this point, you can also sort of like hypothesize, well, actually, we are in a social technical practice. Others are just like straight up numbers. So we've looked at the sort of like quality of work. So another research was done around what makes developers frustrated and sort of unhappy at work. So, you would have your typical things where basically you might have some issues with why doesn't it work? So basically mapping behavior to cause you have some issues with your programming tools. So either setting up your IDE or doing some other linters that just don't work the way you want them to work, or generally adjusting to a new project where you lack of your programming expertise when you need to switch from Java to Clojure all of a sudden, and size of the issues that are being assigned to you. And they also identify the sort of in-between and blurry areas when you very often would be assigned something that is sold to you in a way as a simple task by people who don't fully comprehend the complexity of it. And then you end up spending loads of time on it, even though they told you it's a simple task. And then another aspect that they've actually looked at was those sort of social and soft problems. So inability to communicate with your peers, fear of failure, internal struggles. And by internal struggles, I don't mean like struggles within the company. I mean the struggles that you have with yourself. So it's more of a self-regulation part. And another research was around what makes us as developers happy. And in there, the bottom line was very straightforward. It was basically balancing the technical and non-technical bits at work. So in there, we sort of say, okay, so we have an understanding that we sort of have to do both of them. So where does it go from there? So another massive study that was done cross-culturally and between different continents and countries, etc. So what they've looked was, what are the search queries and generally what do developers search for when they basically are on a project and when they worked? And what I found was, well, we searched for code snippets. Number one, this is the most common thing that we search for. This is the most relevant thing that we basically want to find. Then obviously you have documentation, how to use libraries, project-specific things, like, for example, if you work for a company that makes kombucha, you might be interested in what the scope is, for example, stuff like that. What they didn't find, actually, was any mention, pretty much anywhere, how to solve the other set of problems that we have at work. So we know we have those technical challenges, and then we have those non-technical challenges. So what they didn't actually find was any mention of how to communicate better, how to agile, basically, or how to resolve conflicts. So this sort of like begs to question why. Like we generally, I think we as developers are quite analytical, and we are aware that our profession is sort of like social technical in nature. And why on earth we sort of like completely discount this whole sort of area? So generally, I think it is sort of known between us developers that everything that is not technical is a soft skill. So let's talk about that. So I would assume that by now we sort of share this understanding that basically half of our work as developers is basically the non-technical aspects. And we can also draw this sort of like very casual relationship between those non-technical aspects and soft skills. So actually, what are the soft skills? So first of all, I think it's worth to look at the history of the term. So soft skills in general are a brainchild of US military from the 60s. So the first body of work that you can actually find around this is a transcript from the US military command conference on soft skills. And I quite recommend browsing through it. It's a lot of reading, but I mean, some bits and pieces are actually quite good. And so what they've done, they presented like numerous talks and papers when they sort of highlighted the problem that we need to come up with a training in which we can basically hone in people their soft skills. And by then they clearly defined the soft skills in their understanding was everything that was not to do with operation of machinery or generally working with machines. So it was stuff to do with people and, well, paper, actually. But quite importantly, what they highlighted as well, that those skills that are non-technical are equally, if even not more important, than the skills related to engineering and operation of machinery. So after the conference was sort of done, and so they tried to follow it up, so they sent up requests to different academies across states to sort of follow up on it and see, okay, what can you guys do about it? What can we implement? And the response was pretty unanimous, and what most academies responded with was, we don't care, and we don't know how to reliably measure it. So back from the 70s, we are off to this sort of like bumpy start with the soft skills. But what was quite relevant was that this idea actually started to branch out to the mainstream. And that was a good thing in a way. So a lot of people elaborated on the subject, they expanded on it, and this sort of led to a natural evolution and also slightly semantic drift of this term. So currently, we can actually see that this term encompasses stuff like communication, motivation, language skills, your habits, time management, leadership, personal traits, empathy, and they added emotional intelligence bits to it as well, which basically produces a pretty vague and concise subject. And then if you look at the actual research done in this area, it is quite difficult to navigate throughout this. So different researchers were framed it differently on the purpose of the study. So some of them might look at the personality aspects, why they will focus on the team dynamics, for example. And this sort of builds like a lot of difficulty in navigation and finding meaningful answers in this term. And then we have education. And I think most of you who have went through education, especially higher one, you can sort of see that it was absolutely abandoned. So if you even browse the curriculums for, I don't know, computer science degrees, you find absolutely no mention of either workshops or classes that would help you to build those skills. And again, there was a study, it was one of the US universities that tried to actually incorporate soft skills workshops and trainings within the curriculum. So from the very beginning, so it was a management course actually, where we can sort of know that there is a much higher value of having soft skills in management, because management is basically, it's to do more with people as compared to us software developers. So from the beginning, they sort of knew that it's going to be quite difficult, because first of all, the time is finite, and second of all, well, if you have a finite time, you have to sort of like divert their resources to something else. So they've done it, and students have graduated, and they've measured what they could. So they measured grades and they measured self-reports of the students. So what the students basically gained through it as a self-report, as compared to previous cohorts, was that they were more satisfied with their learning, and they were more confident to actually enter the job market. And what they also found, that on the grades level, those students who actually participated in the soft skills workshops, they performed much worse on those technical aspects that were gradable. And as we all know, the universities, their ranking and their prestige is based on the outcomes that the students have. So that was one of the examples, and I think it's been picked up by many universities as an against practically of doing that, because the university will have to sort of pay the cost of having those workshops. And then if you look at the professional industry, you know, the message is quite simple, actually. We need the soft skills, and you have this mantra sort of going around that soft skills are, you know, a predictor of academic and professional success. And again, as mentioned earlier, it is a pretty wide spectrum of skills, so it's hard to sort of correlate which one of those things, you know, are a predictor, or is it all of them, or is it, you know, some bits and pieces of that. And we also tend to, as a result of that, we tend to get a wrong impression about the soft skills, because when we actually have any contact with it, is actually at the point where we are being recruited for our jobs. So it's a part of job screens, and unfortunately, the job screenings will fall into one of the two extremes. So they will evaluate it, and they will evaluate your soft skills, but they will just look at this part, which is basically your personality. So they will check you're an extrovert. That's great. You can communicate. It's all good. You have soft skills. If you're an introvert and you keep your things to yourself, then well, they'll probably say, well, he's not going to be a team player, right? And on the other spectrum of this whole thing is basically no one cares. Like they don't evaluate your soft skills at all. So it sort of like creates the stigma in our heads that, well, actually, they are not that important. I can do pretty well without actually having them. And then we sort of like go on with our life, and we are adults. And at some point we recognize there is a need actually to learn those skills. And what we will do, we will usually go online, and we'll have this big problem, because the stuff that is available, so have availability and accessibility. Accessibility is the ease at which you can basically digest given resources. And the problem that the resources around the soft skills, they would usually offer you sort of quick and easy solutions to the problems. They would also provide you a set of absolute truths, how you can basically live your life. And they would typically be a very self-help book-like in nature. And why they're also quite accessible is because they present you with an anecdotal evidence. So it's something that you can very easily relate to, but at the same time, it's not something that is very reliable. So you have this whole breed of sort of gurus and ideologies that aren't too scientific, but it is something that basically we get the most exposure to. And as a sort of final remark, we have this sort of auxiliary problem to the whole thing, where it's the name itself So if we sort of have soft skills, we sort of know that soft lives on the opposite spectrum of hard. And we also know that the hard skills are the ones that relate on the IQ. And, if we have the soft skills, then they'll definitely not depend on the IQ that much. I mean, it is sort of like they start to blur it a bit with the emotional intelligence and everything. But personally, it's my opinion. Or like the whole community is quite divided in this particular aspect. I'm not a big fan of the concept. I still think that reasoning about emotions and emotional states is still reasoning, it's still IQ. But that's a whole different story. So we're not sort of going to go there. So to sum it up real quick, we know it's a concept with a long history. We know it is quite vague and also almost esoteric, basically, in its term. And it's basically because of that, it's hard to relate it to professional work, and it's hard to reliably measure it. We know it's excluded from the educational. So we know that there is a definite skill gap. And we know that in principle and in definition, it will depend on the personal traits, which are sort of considered, not they aren't, but they are considered to be quite set in stone once you sort of reach your adulthood. And also there is a lot of misinformation in this area. And finally, we have the semantic load that we just mentioned. So going back to the original question, why do software developers ignore that skill, even though we sort of know that software development is a socio-technical practice? Why do we ignore it that much? So based on the stuff that we presented and discussed so far, we can think of 3 possible answers to it. So first of all, there is a stigma. So we don't find it as an attractive or valuable thing to learn. We see the cost of it, but not necessarily the benefit. Second of all, there is no training ground. So since it was never formally taught to us, we don't really know where to start while learning it. And we don't know how to create this sort of safe environment in which we could practice those skills. For example, we know how to practice programming in a safe environment. We might do a kata, for example. For soft skills, we don't have such a thing. And third of all, we don't perceive it as a skill really that can be learned. And it's something that popped up in quite a few conversations that I had with people, is when we sort of talk about the soft skills, they would sort of narrow it down, but it's personality traits really, and it's not something that I can change. So, it's not something that I change, it's not something that I can really work on. So in the following sections, what we're actually going to discuss is how we can address those issues. And the first of all is the core skills. So core skills, basically what it's trying to do is trying to basically deal with the stigma of the whole problem. So one of the sort of like basic strategies when they try to do a stigma, or generally a negative perception of any problem, what you try to do first, and we know it's been successfully done in the past, is to, well, rebrand it. And my favorite rebranding of all time is basically bills to subscriptions. It's a phenomenal case. So we know the bill, and bill has a very simple connotation. It's something that you have to pay for. It's a cost. Well, if you look at the subscription, which in principle is pretty much the same thing, you have this emphasis on the benefits that you receive. And all of a sudden, you're very happy to pay for your subscriptions. Maybe, I'm not going to name any stuff, but for the bills, not really. Another example that is sort of closer to our hearts as developers is non-functional requirements. So for those who need a refresher of memories, it's stuff like security, performance, maintainability, scalability, or usability of the software. And if you think about the non-functional requirements, you sort of have this emphasis, well, okay, it is a cost, it's something that we have to deal. And over a decade ago, what some smarter than me people done, they sort of rebranded it to cross-functional requirements. And this concept is so sort of like gaining traction as we speak, but over 10 years that they've done it, they've noticed one significant change, that the teams that have actually adopted this term, they started to shift their priorities and also shifted their focus to actually implement those cross-functional requirements. So generally speaking, when we talk about a rebranding, we talk about shifting to value. So from the cost to value, this is what we want people to basically focus on. And it's going to be especially relevant in a situation when you need to look at it from the business perspective. If you try to sell any term to the company, you want the company to perceive it as something valuable, not as an added cost. But also on a personal level, when you try to speak with other people, it's easier to convince other people of something if you tell them this is valuable, and also people be more likely to learn something and they sort of perceive the value of it. So with that sort of introduction, we can sort of like say goodbye to the soft skills and say hello to the core skills. And core skills is a relatively new concept. So it's dating back to the 2019. And it was introduced by Professor Jennifer Palamis of University of San Francisco. And what it stands for is competence in organizational and relational effectiveness. And what she proposes is a narrowed down and focused subset of skills, which are necessary to actually deal with those non-technical challenges, but in the context of the work environment, but also academia as well. So what we see again is this shift to value. So let's sort of like slightly dig down to what the core skills are, and also re-emphasize what the core skills are is the competence in organizational and relational effectiveness. So again, we see it really re-emphasizes it at all points that it is actually something that is valuable, and it's also something that you can learn. So first of all, so she basically looks at two domains. So first of all is the relational skills. So we have very simple stuff like positive attitude. It's also a concept that is sort of related to emotional labor for those of you who are sort of like in the loop. But you also have stuff like trustworthiness. You have effective communication, leadership ability, ability to cooperate, responsibility, initiative, ability to manage emotions, and team and self-awareness. In the organizational theme and the spectrum of skills, you have, first of all, ability to understand the organizational context. So again, it's something that research at Microsoft was highlighting quite heavily when in their sort of like open letter to academia. Because people who, especially who enter the work environment, they don't really understand the context, and they don't really understand how uncertain and shifting everything is. Going back to the organization bits, it's also ability to develop meaningful networks within and outside of organization, ability to influence others through any means necessary, obviously, and also you'll be able to manage conflicts, negotiate, coach and mentor, and to read and manage other people's emotions. So in short, what the core skills are actually trying to achieve is, first of all, shift the perception to value. Then second of all, very importantly, is to decouple it from the skill set, so decouple the skill set from personality traits, so the problem that we have with the soft skills. Also to change the semantic load, where we basically have the soft, hard pair, and create a more precise and industry-focused groundwork that could help us to tailor trainings. I mean, obviously, this is not going to be a silver bullet through. There's still a lot of challenges that we have to deal with, even with having something like that. But it is I think it's a good starting point, because in principle, naming something differently isn't going to change the fact it's still going to be difficult to measure. So we should think about different methods of assessment. But we sort of know that it is possible because we know how to assess people's ability to, for example, drive a vehicle. We know how to assess people's ability, and we have metrics to sort of assess the quality of the code. So we have, solid, we have clean code, we have dry, and we have many others sort of disciplines through which we can basically say this is a good code, this is, well, not so good code, or it could be improved basically. And another problem is we still don't know which areas to sort of prioritize. So on which skills will we get the most sort of return on the investment if we put our time and effort into it? So, and it's something that we'll sort of try to address today. So what we are going to do in the further sections is one organizational skill, which is our ability to read and manage others' emotions. So we're going to have a look at the theory of mind. And second of all, we'll look at the relational aspects. So it's going to be around the team and self-awareness. And in this one, we're going to quickly browse through the cognitive biases. So with all of that in mind, I would actually suggest a tiny bit of homework for you to do. And it's something that you can do with people in your company. So I would suggest start with the book Accelerate. What it does, it outlines, you don't even actually have to have the book. If you just Google the term 24 key capabilities to drive improvement, you'll find it, but it is adopted from that book. And basically this book is an outline of a research that they've done around how to measure and how to apply basically technology to drive the business value, but also how to measure software delivery performance. And, just to give you an idea of it, you might have stuff like, automate your deployment processes, implement continuous integration, implement customer feedback. You could have, checking systems health proactively, etc. It's generally DevOps stuff. And then quickly browse through the core skills paper. And basically what you can do as a sort of like general group activity, draw a Venn diagram to help you visualize what is the overlap between those 24 capabilities and the core skills. See how they match. And I would say it would be a good starting point to basically to have a conversation with your colleagues that maybe we should basically think about shifting those priorities that we have in our trainings. But also it would be a good starting point for you when you try to speak with your business about what is the value of it, because the key capabilities, it's something that we sort of are aware of. They are quite tested, and we know that they bring value. And if we know that the significant amount of those things are basically based on the core competencies, maybe that would be something that we should basically spend a tiny bit more time on. So just to recap, so thus far we sort of spoken about how basically half of our time is the non-technical stuff, at least half our time, and how our industry is basically socio-technical practice. We sort of associated the social parts with the soft skills, and then we also sort of connected the soft skills with basically concept that is a bit too blurry and not very easy to implement. So then we've spoken about how we can rebrand it to the competence in organizational and relational effectiveness. So we're halfway through it at least. And by now I'm quite aware that probably most of you are sort of slightly losing attention or drifting off, and the energy levels are dropping down a bit. So we will slow down a bit, and I'll have a sip of water as well. And what we're going to focus on is babies and the theory of mind. And coincidentally, it's also one of the core competencies. So what this will basically focus on is our ability to read other people's emotions. So I think most of us already know what the theory of mind is, and but don't know really that it is called this way. And it's simply our ability to sort of reason about others' goals, thoughts, motivations, and emotions, and what they do, the things they do, and what other people are likely to do next. And it's also stuff like, being able to keep up with who knows what in a rather fast-paced conversation. And hopefully, as I sort of showed those pictures, you were sort of quite naturally and quite easily able to emphasize with those people and sort of see, okay, so that they feeling that, they want to do this. So you can very easily read it. And it is a very, very natural competency that we have as people. But only because it's natural, it doesn't mean you can't do anything around it. So how do we know? I mean, this is an MRI image, but what we would talk probably quite normally would be an fMRI, which is basically your activity in your brain. So first of all, how we know about it is because we've done experiments on children, so best subjects. And it's something that if you are a parent, you can actually do on your kids as well. You'll need to grab them at the age of 3, of 5, and 7, and do this very simple experiment. So the task that is done to see, basically flesh out the theory of mind and how it develops is called a false belief task. There are many variations of it, but personally, I find the most interesting and fun one to do with pirates and sandwiches. It was introduced by Professor Rebecca Sachs from MIT. So what she needs, well, first of all, we need the children, right? So once we have the children, you need to place them on the stool and you need to present them with the story. So first of all, you introduce a pirate. Let's say the pirate's name is Andy and he's got a sandwich, yeah? So then what the pirate will do, he'll place his sandwich on a chest. This chest is on the beach, waves in the background, it's all good. And then the pirate Andy will just go away somewhere. He will grab something to drink. Doesn't matter, he no longer can see his sandwich. And then what will happen? The wave will come and it will basically move the sandwich from the chest to the sand. What will happen next? We have a second pirate. Let's say this pirate is called Brian. So we started with a situation when there's one sandwich on the sand and there's still the chest. And there is a new pirate. His name is Brian, let's say. And this pirate Brian also has a sandwich. So what this pirate will do, he'll put his sandwich on the chest as well, and he'll also go away to grab something to drink. Now, what will happen next is we'll have the situation. So we'll have one sandwich on the sand and one sandwich on the chest. And then Pirate Andy, so the first pirate, comes back. And you ask a question, which sandwich will he pick? And this is where we can actually see how our ability to read other minds emerges. So a 3-year-old, they'll basically have no clue and they would sort of know, okay, so he had the sandwich and then it was like, so he would say, yeah, it's the one on the sand. So obviously it's incorrect. And then we, he'll mature, he would come back, he would do the same experiment at the age of 5. And he'll ask him the same question. And then he will be very convinced and straight away he was, well, it's on the chest. Very easy. So at this point, you basically follow it up with additional questions, so add more depth to it. So you ask him, okay, and if he picks up the sandwich that is not his, do you think this is his fault for picking the wrong one? And now what a 5-year-old will do, obviously he messed up, this is his fault. He's like, yeah, we should blame him for not picking the correct sandwich. He should have known better. And then he waits another 2 years, and a 7-year-old at this point, he would then develop this ability to say, well, actually, how could he have been known? This is not his fault. Like, we shouldn't blame him. This was this wave and it just put it on the sand. It's like there was nothing, absolutely nothing that we could have done. So based on this very simple paradigm that was done with many other things, so crayons, that basically you had a box of crayons and inside were candles, many other things, we're basically able to build this very simple paradigm through which we sort of learned we have the ability to do all those things. We also then developed better technologies than looking at children. So we developed fMRI. And through fMRI, we were able to do the same paradigm, but then we sort of started to look at the brain activity. So what we basically know at this point, we have the whole very dedicated network called the mentalizing network in our brains. And it's responsible for us being able to read our human beings. But what is very important about the theory of mind, contrary to what we would like to believe, is it is not about getting it right. It's about knowing that we might get it wrong. So pirates and sandwiches, this is like a very simple context. Usually our context as an adult are much more complex. And what we tend to do, we would very often fall into those biases. So first of all, we would be very prone to something called egocentric bias, through which we will filter others' perceptions based on our standards. We will also be influenced by our own beliefs very heavily, our knowledge or preferences, and also things like our low self-esteem or feeling of blame. So if you know that we've done something wrong, it will impact our judgment of other people's, what they might be thinking about us. And I think for each individual person, it's something very important to keep in mind, because if we have this tendency to think this way, so when we think someone thinks poorly about us, or we think someone has ill intentions, it's worth considering that before we take any actions, or before we actually really believe that, it's worth to clarify it and speak with those people, because we are very, very, very likely to get this wrong. And once we are on this sort of subject of the egocentric biases, let's have a very quick run through the cognitive biases. So the cognitive biases are basically patterns of deviation from our sort of rational, logical judgment and thinking that basically put us astray on a very weird route. And it's very helpful to think about them as sort of cognitive illusions. And they are very similar to those sort of optical illusions that we can find elsewhere. And the thing about illusions is that even if you are aware of them, as soon as by the way, the last one is so-called Thatcher's illusion, the one with the faces being all weird and messed up, but still looking all right if you put it upside down. The thing about illusions is that even though you were aware of them, if you change the context of the illusion, you will fall for it again. And the same thing happens in here. We can learn about the biases, but only this knowledge is not going to help us not to fall in them as soon as they happen in a different scenario. So many smart people has done a lot of very smart research about this topic, and one of them is Kahneman. So he looked at the heuristic versus algorithmic thinking in his book Thinking Fast and Slow. Other person was a Fleischmann. He created this sort of taxonomy of 8 categories where he sort of grouped different biases. And generally, there is a lot of them. So if you look at this index, I would say don't squint, don't look. It's purposely like that. You're not supposed to read it. It's just to visualize. There is a lot of them. And what is important, you would generally talk about sort of 4 main areas in which those biases occur. So sometimes you have too much information and need to sift through it very quickly. Sometimes you need to act very fast. Sometimes you will not have enough meaning, and sometimes you will need to decide what information actually to remember. So very often you can think of them as basically being, mental shortcuts. And that is not necessarily something bad. And the thing that you can do to remove the bias, actually one guy who's, again, very smart person called Fischoff, he's done a research in the debiasing. So he looked at 5 different levels at which you can actually remove the bias from your environment. So first of all is the warning about the possibility. And that's something that we're sort of going to do today. Then on the second level, you can describe the direction and extent of the bias that we're going to observe. And it's also slightly we're also slightly going to cover that today. Then it's providing feedback about this. So it's something that you can do in the organizational context. And then you have, this much sort of deeper level where we do extended training and coaching. And interestingly enough, it's something that they start to pursue in medical professions. So as a part of treatments, they start to work on it and see what sort of impact that would have, for example, in anxiety. But that's a sort of whole different story. And on the fifth level, he sort of said, okay, we can also debias the task rather than people. So he had those 5 sort of levels that he has tested, and his findings were quite straightforward. So levels 1 through 3, they're rarely effective. They'll not prevent you from anything. Level 4 is extremely expensive, and it's not practical to do on a day-to-day basis. If you do a therapy, by all means, this could be a good thing, and it's something that people are working on right now. So what he basically recommended, and it's something that a lot of people are sticking to, is the 5th level, which is basically debiasing the task itself. So from our point of view, it's something where we can think about biases from the policy-making level. So I think a good summary, especially in software development, is Tale from Trenches and cognitive biases in software development. And I think the bottom line of it is abandon all hope. Simple as that. It's very difficult to apply this knowledge to your day-to-day practice. So basically for us, what it means that we should be focusing on it. We should have the awareness of it. We should know the repercussions of those things, and we can apply it to basically build policy. So when we think about our internal processes and all of this, we can think about the pitfalls that we can fall into. So with that in mind, and with that in mind that some of the stuff is going to be completely irrelevant, I still think it's pretty cool to sort of think about those and cover those biases. So first of all, we'll have a confirmation bias. And in our industry, it's something that you can find in testing, refactoring, and also generally speaking, the policy making. And it's basically a situation in which we are attending the sources that confirm our existing beliefs. And also at the same time, our tendency to discount the sources that challenge our beliefs. And I think something that most of you has already done as I was giving the speak, because I think in quite a few places, I might have challenged what you believe. And I think quite intuitively what you have done, you sort of discounted it straight away, or you just assume you just purge it from your memory because it was creating this dissonance. And it's perfectly all right. It's something that we naturally do, but it's good to keep it in mind. So most specifically, it's something that you'll see in testing, and is the tendency to sort of confirm that what we've built as a developer. So we work on a feature. Well, God forbid we do TDD, then it's all messed up. Then probably we're not going to see that. But let's assume we don't do that, and then we test our code. And if we test our code, we are most likely to try to confirm our belief that what we've done was good. So we will purposely avoid those sort of edge cases and corners, and we'll avoid a situation in which we'll try to break our own stuff. And let's move on to availability. Availability, there's a fun thing that you can do with the availability. And I would say it's an exercise that you can run when you do a retrospective. Ask the people in a raw percentage, how much do they think they've contributed to a given sprint? Ask them to write it down, then collect it. Then sum it all up. And I can promise you, you will end up with a number that is greater than 100. And basically what it does, it means that we are more likely to see and consider only the things that we are aware of. So it's also something that you would see, when companies say they promote transparency, this is exactly that. Or when you feel undervalued in your company, this is exactly that. People don't have the visibility. So when they don't have the visibility, they don't basically going to attend this. And I think it's relevant, especially when you talk to people, because when you speak with them, you have to have awareness that they will think they are more important than you think they are. And this should be respected. And we will also underestimate other people's contributions because we weren't there, we didn't see that. And then a final, like pure cognitive bias, that you can actually see very easily every time you brush your teeth. When you have a full toothpaste, you'll be quite generous. So just slap the toothpaste on the toothbrush and you just go on and brush your teeth. When you reach this critical point of the toothpaste, where it sort of looks a bit sad and, well, used up, you'll be quite careful not to use too much because it still needs to last you until the next time you go to the shop. So you just use a tiny grain. That is actually prescribed amount, like most of the toothpaste, they tell you just use a tiny bit, but we'll be very conscious just to use a tiny bit. And this is what actually is happening with the anchoring. And this is a situation where we base our estimations on the things that we do on the initial value that is being set. And in our work environment, it's happening in quite a few places. So first of all, it's when we actually do the estimates. So the length of the sprint that we're doing. So if we imagine we can do a 1 week sprint, we can do a typical one, or a 3 week one. The length of that sprint, it will have a profound impact on the amount of time that we basically estimate our tasks on. Also, there is an additional danger if you are in any sort of place of power. So if you're a project manager, maybe a team lead, the numbers that you suggest as an estimation, they'll act as an anchor. So especially if you are under pressure as a manager and you feel like, okay, we need to do this fast, so I'll try to motivate them, and you tell them it's, well, spend 2 hours on it, and someone knows it's 7 hours, they will be more likely to negotiate and say, okay, it's going to take maybe 3-4 hours, rather than saying, well, maybe 6-9. Again, estimation, very big subject and very controversial one at that. But we just have to keep those things in mind, that if we just throw a number in there, the people will anchor around that. Also, when it's actually visible very often is in how we reuse the code. So I don't want to say it's more about junior developers, because the research showed that everyone has done it, and especially they do it with the SQL queries. Is when you don't know how to do something, and especially if you don't know, if you work with SQL, it's usually quite difficult to find things that are not, depending what's the thing you're using, but generally speaking, it is more difficult than anything else. And what people will do, they will usually find something that sort of does something quite similar, and they will anchor on it. So rather than thinking about solving something, they'll try to reuse that thing, and they will anchor on the original solution and then try to bend it to their will. And you have a lot of memes on the internet showing what software developers do when they copy paste code from Stack Overflow. It's a source of humor for a lot of us. And finally, they're not technically cognitive biases, but they sort of fit within the same theme. And I think it's worth discussing them. So again, they are not strictly cognitive biases, they are slightly different phenomena altogether. So first of all, we have a sunk cost fallacy. So it's something that we will have in debugging or committing to a wrong solution. And it's a situation in which we continue a behavior as a result of previously invested resources. So if you've ever played poker, a lot of people will sort of start betting and everything, and they'll sort of reach the situation like, there's a crap, there's actually nothing that you can do with those cards, but I've already bet that. So they sort of like go, well, what the hell, I'm gonna play a bit more. And they usually lose. So this is basically more or less what the sunk cost fallacy is. And we have to be aware of it. And in our profession, it's something that we can see when we commit to a wrong solution. So at some point when we reach this point where we write the code and we know it's going wrong, but we already invested so much time in it, we can already feel that there is a new idea brewing in our brains that, well, we could actually approach it and solve it better, but we don't do it because we've already committed so much time that, well, it would be lost. Well, actually, alternative solution very often will be much better and superior to the one. So in this situation, it is very helpful if you're actually working in pair, because the other pair might help you to understand this issue and help you to move forward with an alternative approach. Then hyperbolic discounting. A very simple example. Again, you have your child, it's very young, and you tell them, I can give you a candy now, or I can give you chocolate tomorrow. They will take a candy now. And it basically says just sooner, smaller rewards, but sooner are basically better than the larger later on. And we can see those stuff basically in nitpicking in the code reviews rather than looking at the whole feature and how it was implemented. It's also profoundly visible in technical debt, where we would basically favor, as we write the code, a quick solution that fixes our immediate problem rather than writing code that is maintainable over time. And then finally, in a slightly wider context, is the repetition blindness or the muscle memory. And it's if you still have not automated your updates on the computer, you'd very often probably see a pop-up saying that, well, update your software, and then say, well, later. And if you see it enough time, you'd not even recognize that you need to update your stuff. And it applies to many other domains of our life. And especially in our industry, if you do like retros, do you daily stand-ups, etc., if you have the same format and repeat it over and over again, people will stop to pay any attention to it, and they'll just sort of go through the notions. So they'll do the stand-up, but it will not bring any value for you. So as a quick fix to it, rotate your formats, change it every now and again. Many things can be basically changed, even in your daily stand-ups that you do that shouldn't last long, but you can still make it interesting to people and more valuable to them. So with that, just gonna wrap it up real quick. And I hope that I have managed to outline and sort of highlight at some point that in soft skills, there'll be no sort of quick and simple catchphrase rules. It will also take time for us to show the business that investing in such a skill set will produce value. It will also take time to convince people that such investment is good for them and will help them progress their career, and also it will improve their quality and satisfaction with work. And it will, most importantly for all of us, take a lot of time and patience to train and develop such skills. And with that, I think we are done, and we slightly overrun. I do apologize for that. And as promised, I'll now leave the references open for a bit so you can grab the screenshots.
Excellent. That was brilliant. Really, really, really interesting. I was thinking, Maciej, what we could do, maybe you could share the slides of the presentation on LinkedIn or even on our site or something like that, perhaps.
I shall.
Yeah.
I shall.
So no questions on the chat.
Good stuff.
Should we leave it there, do you think?
Yes.
Yeah.
With pleasure. See you.
Oh, no, we have a question. Wait, Maciej, wait.
Okay.
Which technique would you use to de-bias a decision-making?
De-bias decision-making. Well, in what sort of context we're looking at? And usually you would first be familiar with those sort of most common biases that you would have in the decision-making. And I think it would require some research first. So you would need to see what sort of things that you're likely to do that might happen in your decision-making process. Then you would also see the context in which you're making those decisions. And to be fair with you, I think it would be slightly more relevant if you look at the consequences of those decisions. So if you sort of doing a post-mortem of those decisions, rather than as a prescriptive approach that you can do proactively before, I think it's more like that's something that you would do after. But as a first step, as always, you would have to build your sort of codex first of the things that you have to be aware of that could basically bite you in the ass all the time.
Great. Yeah, it's really interesting. It's just being aware of them, isn't it? Being aware of those types of biases.
Yeah,
And
but like I said, the problem is that even if you are aware of them, it's this sort of analogy with the illusion. So even though you know about them, when the things are happening, when the things are in motion, they just happen, and they aren't necessarily always bad. Like they are there for a reason. So we evolved with them to help us basically survive different situations.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, right then. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Maciej. That was a really good talk, and I look forward to continuing this topic in the next series. Will be the dates will be published soon, won't they? And we can continue this really fascinating conversation around soft skills in software development. Thanks again, Maciej.